Hello and welcome to Bud Explains, where I take a subject, be that rules, history or concept, from the role-playing world and try to explain it to you in a way that I hope helps you understand how it works. Today's explanation is Pisces and Delta Green, Part 4. Again, please note that this is generally considered handler-only information, so watch at your own risk. To quote Nietzsche, "He who fights with monsters might take care lest he thereby become a monster." And in the world of Delta Green, the biggest difficulty is knowing who the monsters really are, as too often they appear as the innocent. Except the army of the Third Eye knows the truth and fights not only the monsters surrounding them, but also those within. A cult-like organisation with terrorist tendencies, the army of the Third Eye began with an American tourist called Lee Coleman in 1989. Lee suffered a mental breakdown when visiting England and became absolutely convinced that there was a demon living in his head, controlling his mind. So strong was his belief that he drilled a hole in the middle of his forehead to kill it, something which saw him committed to a psychiatric ward and subsequently escaping a few months later. Between 1989 and 1993, he went on to kidnap 10 other people across the UK, believing them to be possessed by the same demon that possessed him, and so performed a trepanning on them, similar to that which had been done to himself. As he had no surgical training, 2 died during the operation and 2 others were left with permanent brain damage. However, those who survived joined the army of the Third Eye and helped him to capture and trepan his other victims. And even those who suffered brain damage and the one who later died refused to assist the authorities in capturing him, claiming that Coleman had actually freed them from some sort of inhuman influence. And the victims' families were actually grateful, claiming that Coleman had cured their loved ones from this malign influence. Though of course the authorities saw it a little differently. In the September of 1996, Coleman and 5 known Army of the Third Eye members were captured in a police raid, and he is now serving 4 consecutive life sentences in Dartmoor prison, with his victims being confined to Broadmoor High Security Mental Hospital, and Coleman becoming the most infamous criminal in Britain at the time since Dennis Nielsen. However, as is the case with the world of Delta Green, the truth is far more horrifying. The Army of the Third Eye has fought the insects of Shagai, the Shan, since 1989 when Coleman became cerebrally infested. At this time, Coleman was taking a backpacking tour of England after graduation, and in the August of 1989 he travelled through the Severn Valley and Goatswood Forest, where he came upon Pisces' operation whereby they were excavating the Shan temple ship. He was captured and held until an interrogator arrived with a box, from which he produced an enormous insect which flew directly into his face. Some time later he woke up by the side of the road near Goatswood Forest, unharmed. It was then that his nights began being filled with sleepwalking and gaps in his memory, and he came to understand that something was making him act against his own will. Eventually, the alien monster inside his head made itself known, explaining that they were now a team, and that Coleman could now assist the Shan in its mission amongst humanity, with the threat of the alien filling his mind with blasphemous memories that would shred his sanity, the monster giving him mere glimpses in order to make him comply. Coleman obeyed, and became an errand boy for the Shan. In October, through an incredible act of willpower, Coleman broke into an abandoned machine shop and used a drill there to put a hole in the centre of his forehead. The Shan was struck by a ray of sunlight that streamed into the hole and fled in panic from Coleman. Coleman was found by the police and hospitalised, being confined to intensive care, a John Doe who was trapped in a coma for 6 weeks. When Coleman finally awoke from the coma, he made the error of explaining what had been done to the hospital staff, who subsequently moved him to a psychiatric ward. His father, Edgar Coleman, was informed. However, before he could travel from Montana to bring him home, Lee escaped and went on the run, very soon starting his war against the demons he knew as the Shan. Coleman discovered that an after effect of having a Shan resident once living in his head was that he had absorbed a great deal of its knowledge, remembering the names and faces of dozens of people who were infested, as well as knowing their plans. He kidnapped the Ministry of Defence engineer, Richard Rowland, who survived the operation and joined Coleman in his war against the Shan, and thus the Army of the Third Eye was formed. When either of them sensed another host, they would observe them to see if they were acting voluntarily or involuntarily, with those appearing like they had been under the influence for too long being deemed too far gone and thus assassinated. In the early days of the army they murdered 2 hosts, with one being covered up as a mugging gone wrong and the other that they had taken their own life. Conversely, if they felt that the host had a hope of recovering, they kidnapped them and took them to a predetermined location to be trepanned. Their first 6 attempts ended badly, with only a single Ministry of Defence programmer, Francine Parch, surviving. 2 others, a Labour Party minister called Julia Charlwood, who survived with symptoms similar to schizophrenia, and Wade Collin, a British aerospace engineer, was left with brain damage that put him in a state whereby he could do nothing for himself. Coleman, taking stock, decided on a differing approach going forward. The next person he decided to rescue was a financial administrator for the British arm of the European Space Agency, and with the help of Rowland and Parch, they kidnapped a Karen Carter, a medical intern who specialised in neurosurgery. She was taken to an isolated house outside of Leicester and told she could either perform the trepanation or be forced to watch them do it. She agreed to perform the operation, and her skills ensured that Grayson pulled through, and the monster that flew from his head made Carter a believer. She assisted the army with 13 more operations, all of whom survived and joined the army, with Carter teaching her methods to other army members so that she would not become a single point of failure. She also gave an ultimatum. She would not assist any more if they continued murdering hosts, reasoning that they were also victims of these alien insects and not fully responsible for their actions. Coleman agreed, but reserved the right to change her mind if the situation required it. Following Grayson, all operations were done on the back of the skull for 3 main reasons. Firstly, more of the skull could be removed in order to light up the cranial cavity. Secondly, it was much easier to cover up. And finally, Coleman joked that they would need a 3rd eye in the back of their head. As membership continued, the army began targeting the Shan's activities in order to sabotage them, with 7 Aerospace being the top of their list. It generally amounted to minor harassment such as threatening calls and puncturing tyres, and whenever possible they would spray "the army is coming" as a kind of calling card, although they never managed to enter the facility due to both the high level of security and, if the Shans became aware, they would repossess them and learn of all of their plans. They also began carrying a small glass vial of cyanide in case they were captured. Nobody was ever to be taken alive by the Shans. The army attempted to publicise their cause, however nobody would have anything to do with them short of turning them into the police, with their second attempt at publicity almost ending in a number of the army being captured. They even made a video of a trepanation replete with the creature flying out of the victim's head, though this was dumped in the same pile as other alien autopsy videos. Also, the Shans evaporated upon dying, meaning that nothing short of being there could convince anyone of the proof that aliens had invaded the British populace. Essentially, until they could capture a live Shan or preserve a dead one, nobody would believe them. Pisces was at first happy to observe, even as more of the Shan hosts were falling to the army, and by 1995 the Shans started feeling desperate, as around 20 hosts had been released from their control, with the army gaining critical knowledge of their plans. Just 10 cases had been reported to the media or Scotland Yard. Through Pisces, the Shans covered up the trepanations to stop Scotland Yard investigating them, and from 1993 to 95, Pisces attempted to defend itself against the army by raising the security around their hosts, and eventually coming to realise that it was essentially impossible to guard them around the clock. In 1996, the Shans chose to intervene directly by using Pisces to take over the Scotland Yard investigation, pretending to be MI5 and the Ministry of Defence. They set up a number of elaborate traps for the army by infecting a low-level employee from 7 Aerospace, Milton Parsons, and made no attempt to hide their change in personality. The case became public and drew the attention of the army. Coleman, who wanted to know what was going on at 7 Aerospace, saw Parsons as a way of finding out what had happened to the strange, engraved pyramid that he had seen in Ghostwood Forest, and give the army enough information to attack. He made sure to encounter Parsons' family to tell them about the Shan infestation and arrive with his team to perform the trepanation. Pisces were waiting for them, along with a contingent from the SAS, however Coleman was more wily than they expected. He had had Parsons move Milton to a farmhouse in Cornwall, and the trepanation was performed in daylight to take advantage of the effect it had on the Shan. The SAS was seriously disadvantaged when assaulting the farmhouse due to it being chosen for having limited approaches, and were ordered to attack by the Shan-infected Pisces agents in order to save the one in Parsons' head. There was a fierce firefight, and once it was done, Coleman and 3 of his compatriots lay dead, one being shot by the SAS and the others imbibing cyanide to prevent being captured. A final act of defiance to stop the Shan escaping, to let its compatriots know the identities of the army members. Though a bad day for the army, it was disastrous for the Shan. The firefight was covered up by Pisces by substituting homeless people who would not be missed for captured terrorists of the army. Pisces, through Scotland Yard, announced that the 6 people captured near Truro were Lee Coleman, Richard Rowland, Francine Parch, Stuart Grayson, William Downing and Captain Thomas Cuthbertson. In reality, only 5 had died. Lee Coleman, Richard Rowland, Cecil Marks, Ryan Partridge and the unfortunate Milton Parsons. Pisces does not want the rest of the world to know that the army exists, and indeed still being hunted, except to reliable Shan hosts and especially not the British media or Scotland Yard. As of 1996, the army has reorganised itself and adjusted their tactics. It has virtually stopped rescuing people from the bugs, and anybody found asking for the army's help can simply not be trusted, and the security that now surrounds the hosts was now too heavy to warrant being caught. Coleman was much more gung-ho when running the army, however, that would have seen it in pieces when trying to destroy the Shan. Karen Carter took over the leadership of the army, with the strategy being investigation rather than annihilation. She began by recruiting people who were not former hosts, those who were not full of hatred due to being mind slaves of the cruel alien monsters, and this is an improvement in a number of ways. Coleman's judgment may have been clouded by vengeance, and it was felt that this would cloud his judgment. Ex-hosts still assist the army, and Carter has done what she can to protect them, even to the point of black market cosmetic surgery to cover up trepanation scars of older members. The army in 1996 has 14 members that remain hidden due to being known by Pisces, and who have had to change their identities and appearance to slip through the cracks in society. 11 are former hosts, and 3 are those whose eyes have been opened to the threat that the Shan pose. These 14 do menial jobs and even beg to stay alive. The army has a further 85 members of whom are not known by Pisces, and Carter is among these members. They are aware at any time that they could come under surveillance. They communicate with absolute caution, knowing that the Shan have state-of-the-art equipment by which to track them, and most often they communicate via written messages passed between couriers using homemade cipher wheels, which are changed every few months. Their main concern is with mapping out the Shan influence in the UK, or as Carter puts it, determining the extent of the infection, with army members looking to track Pisces, 7 aerospace and increased participation in the European Space Agency, and any individuals involved, with public resources being used to keep distance between the Shan and themselves. It's a cautious approach, and until the army finds out who is involved, they don't want to take any direct action. This has created some divisions within the army, including going public with the information. However, definitive proof would be needed, and even if proof was sent out, UK censorship could see it quashed before going any further. The use of the foreign press has been touted, as UK whistleblowers have used it to circumvent the UK Official Secrets Act. Going to the government with their proof has also been discussed, though the extent of the infection within the government is unknown, though it has been determined that the government could perform an in-house cleaning to root out alien infiltration. It's deemed that this could not only be useless, but at worst, deadly. There are various differing foreign governments that have been mooted, though this debate continues. The Army of the Third Eye knows a lot about the Shans and their plans, due to memory exchanges between hosts and individual Shan, though only those Shan that were spawned on Earth have infested army members. They know only what the Elder Shan told them about Shagai, Ziclotl, and life on other planets. Additionally, former hosts have memories of the Shan's worship of the Demon Sultan, with this being why their sanity is on a knife edge. The army sees the Shans as a fugitive race fleeing their destroyed homeworld, that are marooned on Earth and that they are deeply attracted to human emotions like a drug. The army does not know that the Shans are divided between those who want to leave and those who want to stay, though they do know that their plans hinge on taking control of key people in the UK government, and they also have no information about other mythos entities such as the Elder Things, the Migo and the Yithians. Only the Shans and the beings of Ziclotl are known to the army. Okay, so the information presented on Pisces was taken from the Delta Green Countdown book, which was released in 1999. So this had me thinking, what's happened in the last 25 years to Pisces? So I reached out to the person currently dealing with the new Pisces book, the original creator of Pisces, Adam Scott Glancy, to see if he could, without spoiling too much, let us know where Pisces are currently at. And, well, this is what he had to say.
The best way I can put this is to look at what sort of Shane Ivy's goals were for the Delta Green reboot. We published that in 96. And the thing that people immediately wanted as players was, as Delta Green players, like, man, we're government agents. We can't call in an airstrike. Where's our license to kill like James Bond? Why don't we have somebody else who's in charge of cleaning up the crime scene, Why don't we have all this cool stuff? Well, how come Majestic has all that? How come our opponents have all that? And, from a gaming point of view, our attitude was, well, you're the underdogs. That's still Call of Cthulhu. We're still playing as a Call of Cthulhu supplement. Even when we changed it and became its own standalone game, we wanted to make sure that we maintained the feeling that you were up against something bigger and more terrible forces than you can bring to bear. Now, in the update, we did bring in some of that. The players actually do get to have some of the abilities of Majestic, and they do get to have a budget and an organization, and they are no longer just doing this in their part-time. They are being assigned to these task forces from their home agencies, of course, but they have that clearance level, and so they are officially on the job, and they don't have to worry about the illegal at that level of illegal in Delta Green, where your own agency wants to know where you were last weekend. You said you broke your leg at Aspen. How come you came home with a bullet wound? That's a little hard to explain to your supervisor at the ATF. You can't back up somebody on an investigation because you've got a bullet hole in your leg you can't explain. That doesn't work. Now, Delta Green has many of those things where they do not have to cover up while simultaneously stealing everything they need to get the job done. And the question Shane wanted people to ask was, after they got all that, got what they asked for, was, did it make it better? Because I'm betting it didn't. We didn't want it to get better. We wanted to get more complicated. We wanted it to become, now there's moral compromises. Back in the day with Delta Green, you find the sorcerer who's turning kids into origami puzzles for the great old ones. You just take him out in a field and you shoot him in the head and drop him into a pre-dug hole, cover him with quicklime, and you're on your way, because there was no higher authority on any mission except the team that was sort of assigned to fix it. Headquarters couldn't send you help. You are the help that they sent out to fix the problem. There is nobody else. If there was anybody else, we'd have sent them. But in the new Delta Green, yes, there is help. There is things, assets you can ask for, reach you can get to extend your abilities. But at the end of the day, you might get that cell phone call that says, that guy who was making origami unicorns out of children's intestines, you're going to need to take him to that same field, except you're going to have to wait. There's going to be a team that's going to meet you there to pick him up. What's going to happen to him? That's below your pay grade. We'll take care of it. Well, wait a minute. I mean, he says, checking his cap and his collar pips, are we the baddies? What's going on here? Somebody else is calling. The thing that you got with more money and more power and more resources was other people calling the shots. So there's a level of moral compromise that comes along with that. And are your superiors making the right decision from an air-conditioned conference room somewhere that you're never going to get invited to? Is that really better? And so the question, the ask for people who read the Pisces stuff was like, man, I want to overthrow the Shan. I want to overthrow the Shan control. I want to expose the enemy within. I want to, stop the invasion, throw off this yoke. I want to rescue the people who have been stuck in Magonia because they knew too much, or the good agents who were maybe let go and fired or pushed out of the organization because they seemed to the Shan like they might one day become a threat. Maybe bring those people back in and get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is protecting the realm. And we're like, okay, that's what you want? Congratulations. It's 25 years later and you got it. What do you mean? Yeah, the Shan have been exposed. Humans are back in charge now. There is nobody inside the organization who is a Shan host who is giving out orders based on their religious devotion, fanatical devotion to Azathoth. The Shan ship has been destroyed. Everything's fixed, right? Everything's better now, right? No, it's not. We gave people what they wanted, what they asked for, in the tradition of the monkey's paw. The wish has been granted, but we're hoping that it has actually gone on to make the situation harder and more difficult and more morally challenging than it did in the battle days when you had a clear enemy, even if that enemy was the enemy within. Your coworkers, your superiors, these people who in the organization that you needed to rely on and weren't sure that you could at any stage in the game. That situation has been remedied in the intervening time, but the players are going to have to deal with the consequences. There are going to be one new type of damaged veteran for Pisces players. There is a new type that can be combined with any of those, and that is the old guard. where your character will have to be of a certain age, because there's a time when the Shan were in charge of Pisces and there's a time when they're overthrown. But you were in Pisces before the overthrow. And you could even be involved with the overthrow. Like if somebody was the old guard and you combine that with violence, maybe you were part of the teams that were engaged in assassinating hosts. Or if you were combined old guard with helplessness, maybe you were one of the people who figured out what was happening at Pisces and found themselves instead locked up in Begonia by their own Pisces Internal Affairs division. You were perhaps one of the people who not only was involved with discovering what the Shan were, but maybe you were part of the groups that was involved with the use of hypergeometry in order to get the Shan out of power, and it cost you. So the old guard is a new damaged character concept where you can start off knowing a lot about what it was like to work there when humans were not in charge, and then been part of the overthrow. Or conceptually or conceivably, you could be part of the overthrow or on the periphery or whatever. And you will start off with a little bit more knowledge, but most of the incoming people will not know, will be coming into this organization unaware of the fact that the organization they're joining is in disrepute because they failed. They will be seen by the rest of the community as the losers who had one mission to protect the realm from supernatural or extraterrestrial or non-dimensional, whatever you want to call them, abnormalities, and they failed at it. They failed spectacularly. The fact that they fixed it doesn't necessarily earn them any points. They're still Pisces is now still surrounded by the rest of the intelligence community looking for some reason, some means more. There's a reason why they haven't been completely dismantled. We've built it into the background that the rest of the British intelligence community just wanted to dismantle Pisces, grab the parts that worked, and throw away the rest, whichever parts would possibly service their missions. But Pisces has remained relatively intact, but they and I won't get into the reasons about why, because that's sort of the keys to the entire setting. But they've maintained their independence and they've maintained their mission, but at a vastly sort of diminished power and reputation. You've got the Shan out, but you're like a patient who had a lot of cancer cut out. That cancer took a lot of useful things with it, like kidneys and a couple yards of intestine and maybe a lung out of two. The excision was painful, and they've been left diminished and fragile and still surrounded by, as if the mission wasn't dangerous enough, they're surrounded by bureaucratic enemies who think they can do the job better for a larger chunk of the budget. And so they've gone to be a very precarious setting, where one is the player's screw up going to be the next screw up that ends the agency. It's on them every time they go out the door. If they fuck it up big enough, is that it? Is that what's going to end it for Pisces? Is that what's going to get everyone sent back to the minor leagues or whatever? You don't know. So that's basically what's going to be happening with Pisces in the new millennium. You get what you asked for, and it did not make things better. It made things more precarious. It made things harder. It did not hand you the keys to a completely deniable, completely above reproach, mythos-busting agency where you can just get out there and get the job done and flash your warrant card anytime the police ask why there's a smoking hole where that orphanage used to be. No, that's not it. It's just gotten harder. They've lost much of their authority and lost much of their power. But the mission is still there. It didn't go away. It's just a question of, can the players keep managing to do it without literally bringing in, we're worried about bringing it into the world usually on Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, these sort of cosmic horror-based games. But one of the themes here is, of course, this idea that if the job's given to somebody else, who are the, you're on the cusp sort of where Delta Green found itself. Delta Green made the decision to become official and take all this stuff, this new authority and this new power, but they lost the ability to make decisions about the final disposition of individual cases and investigations. That could be taken out of your hands. Pisces is in a situation where if they fail, somebody else is going to be taking on this duty. At this point, His Majesty's government acknowledges that there is a problem and a duty that needs to be executed. The Shan are an undeniable fact as an alien life form, much in the same way that the deep ones became an undeniable fact to U.S. military for the creation of Delta Green. So they know that there is such a thing as things that appear to be alien that people have mistaken as supernatural, not devils or spirits or whatever leaking up from hell. So they get that, and they know it needs to be dealt with, but the question is still an open one as to who. And if Pisces can't do the job, then it'll be handed off to 5 or 6 or some other built from the ground up agency. And the thing is that maybe they're going to have different, you don't know. You don't know what their agenda is going to be. Is it going to be, this hypergeometry is just math, right? It's just math. UCHQ is good at math. Maybe they should just be using this as a means to disrupt enemy communications. What could go wrong, right? It's not like we're going to summon Yog-Sothoth by accident just because we're screwing with Russia's over-the-horizon radar system or hacking into, Iran's computer system for controlling their centrifuges while they're trying to, refine uranium. I'm sure we're not going to have an unintended consequence because we're playing around with hypergeometry, right? We're smart. The reason those other people screwed up is because they were all primitive screwheads who believed in magic. We recognize this as science and math and numbers, and we're fine. We're good. We have computers. Do you really want some guy in an office who's never had contact with the unnatural making that decision? What bad decisions they're going to make when they go, yeah, we're gonna take the entire library that you have there that you've collected since World War II, stuff you captured off the Nazis, stuff you captured off of individual sorcerers. We're gonna digitize that. We need to have scans of all those books so they could be on the internet or ease of access for our researchers. The idea of going to a library and taking an actual musty tome written on vellum off a shelf in order to consult the information, that just flies in the face of modern efficiency. We need to have this on a thumb drive. There could be guys making those decisions if Pisces isn't. So you're still not just trying to do the mission against the unnatural. You're also there to protect humanity from itself, from thinking that it can utilize this stuff without drawing a penalty. So that's where we are with Pisces as far as, what the new mission and what the new world is going to look like. Some of it is, I didn't realize it until now, but some of it is sort of related to even I suppose there's a mirror there and sort of the idea of the United Kingdom being diminished over the course of the 20th century from being the global superpower to being part of 2 islands and a number of overseas possessions. There are all these groups that have these ideas about how to better do Pisces mission, in sort of the same way that there are all these up and coming powers that are like, well, we can do this better than you did, and are sort of pushing and there are forces that are trying to sideline the UK as a financial center for Europe, and there's other factors that are involved with leaving the European Union. But it's all I never thought of analyzing what I had thought about for Pisces in terms of Brexit, where you want the thing, you get the thing that you wanted, and it made everything worse.
If you found this video useful, don't forget to like and share it. Make sure to subscribe for more Bud Explains videos in the future. Bud out.